Welcome to the Politics and Media Show. Last week, supporters of Shaker Aamer, the last British prisoner in the Guantanamo Bay prison camp, gained 100,000 signatures on a petition. This forces a parliamentary debate on why he has not been returned to this country despite being cleared of any charges. Shaker Aamer is one of 166 prisoners still in the Guantanamo Bay, despite President Obama's first-term promise to close the facility. Many are now on hunger strike, and guards in the camp have opened fire with rubber pellets to suppress recent protests. Let's take a look at this report.
Shaker Aamer, the British resident incarcerated in Guantanamo Bay despite being cleared of all charges, is currently undergoing a hunger strike, which his lawyers say may be his last. Other inmates, many of which have also been cleared, are also hunger striking in protest at their continued detention. Aamer is the last British resident to still be in captivity in Guantanamo, and whilst the British government have engaged in some low-level diplomacy to secure his release, many feel that they ought to do more. Their wishes may soon be fulfilled, for a petition in support of Shaker's plight has attracted some 100,000, passing the required threshold for it to be debated in Parliament. But some feel that the debate, which is due this Wednesday, may come to naught. Many of his supporters believe it to be America's will blocking his release. Though it appeared unclear why this was, revelations last week that Aamer had claimed he was tortured by American agents in the company of British ones, something both countries would want to avoid surfacing in court, may provide an answer. However, Aamer is permitted to be released to Saudi Arabia, the country of his birth, but this deal likely comes with a lengthy prison sentence and further time away from his family. This week would give us a strong indication whether the British government will act on Shaker Aamer, but the continuing hunger strike may well force America's hand to act now and act fast to avoid being held responsible for the death of countless inmates, one of which is a British resident. Amanda Thomas Johnson, Islam Channel.
With me in the studio are Hilary Stauffer, Deputy Director of Reprieve, Suliman Gani from the Save Shaker Aamer campaign, and on the phone, John Rentoul, Chief Political Correspondent from The Independent on Sunday. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Hilary, what's your take on why the British government hasn't moved on this case?
Their version of it is that it's too diplomatically hard to do it. Basically, they say they've written to the Americans, and the Americans just keep saying, well, we'll send him back when we can, or perhaps he can only go to Saudi Arabia. But I think in real life it would be embarrassing if they brought Shaker back. There's lots of evidence that Shaker has been tortured over the years, that the British were complicit in it, or at least present while it was happening. And if he's come back, it will be similar to all the other cases that came out, Binyam Mohammed, Muazzam Beg, other cases that came out with British residents, with the complicity of the British government, and I think they're trying to avoid that.
Suliman, is that your take? What do you think is behind the government's position on this?
Yeah, I mean, really, given that we already have met the family, and given that we have seen over and over, the reports have come very clear, no charge, no trial, cleared for release. So it is something we cannot understand. There's something that is happening behind the scenes. How is it possible? That is the question that the people normally ask us. If you know it's been cleared, when I went on the campaign, that is what they are asking. You say it's no charge, no trial, so why are they holding him back? And this is a similar question that I am really wanting to know. I am also curious, and there's no answers to this.
John, let me bring you in. Why do you think the government has, for someone who has, been cleared of all charges, why not just let him back in?
Well, it's not a question of the British government. The British government's position is that they're prepared to have him here, even though he's a Saudi Arabian national, and we have no responsibilities to him except that his family are here. The mystery is why the Americans won't release him, having said that he's cleared and he's ready to go. And I'm afraid I don't understand that either. So,
what do you think? Do you think that anything will emerge from the parliamentary discussion that will show any light on this?
Well, I think no, because I think the mystery lies in the American system. And the American system is incredibly complicated and difficult to understand because, I mean, even George Bush, who, is not necessarily regarded as on the side of liberal and right, wanted to free the Guantanamo prisoners and wanted to close the place down, but Congress wouldn't allow him to. I mean, the problem is understanding the politics of the American Congress, and that is something that I'm afraid I'm not enough of an expert in.
Hilary, do you think that's right, that the British government has done all that it can do, and that the logjam is over the Atlantic?
Logjam is over the Atlantic. I would dispute that the British government has done everything they can do. They've certainly made the minimum diplomatic request to bring him back, but it's just a series of letters saying, we would like it if you released him, and the U.S. says, well, not right now, and then the British say, okay, well, we tried. And that's probably not good enough. But the logjam is over the Atlantic in the U.S. with this law called the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. Since 2010, this bill, which is really just a defense spending bill, has had inserted in it a certain provision that makes it extremely difficult to release anybody from Guantanamo, either to the United States, to the country where they're from, or to a third country. So that's actually is the problem, and it needs a bunch of certifications from the military and from the Secretary of Defense and from the Secretary of State. But Obama does have the capability to work and release people, and if Shaker can't be released to the United Kingdom, who, you know, the special relationship, the United States' best friend, it will be very difficult to release any of the other 55 men who have been cleared for release.
Suliman, why do you think it is that, Obama promised to close this place as part of his initial campaign for the presidency a term and a bit ago now? What do you think it is in the American political system that's stopping this happening?
Yeah, here again, I mean, I'm not a political expert, but what we can, you can see it's an ongoing American foreign policy, and maybe they are trying to win over. If you take back into the history of the intervention of many wars that are ongoing, whether it's also in Afghanistan, because we have to remember that Shaker Aamer, he himself was abducted while he was in Afghanistan with his family on humanitarian work. So if he is taken from there, and then it could be like, somebody you have captured, abducted, and is totally innocent. Now, do you want to save your face? You have kept so many as we have heard now, over 55 that have been cleared for release. Now, so many years have gone by. 11 years he has been languishing there, and even though he's totally innocent. So is it that maybe he has witnessed so many atrocities that have taken place? Maybe he has an eyewitness account of the injustices that are happening inside Guantanamo, which the world probably are unaware of. So it seems as if though they want to keep him there longer and maybe to silence him, or maybe they don't want the world to know what really is happening inside Guantanamo. So, I'm also very, curious to have more answers. Just like all of the people are inquiring.
John, do you think with the developments in recent weeks, the hunger strikes, the opening fire by the guards on the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, do you think it's reaching a tipping point where keeping the place open is now going to become unsustainable politically?
No, I'm afraid not. As you pointed out, Barack Obama was elected on a promise to close Guantanamo in a year, and the continuing existence of Guantanamo ought to be a huge embarrassment, not just to America, but to her allies, which is why the British government has always called for it to be closed. But we mustn't allow. Hilary from Reprieve sounds as if she knows much more about the American side of this than I do. But we mustn't allow conspiracy theories about British complicity in torture as being a factor in all this. Whether or not some agents of the British state may have witnessed torture or had some responsibility for it has got nothing to do with the Guantanamo issue. Guantanamo ought to be closed, and that's a very simple and straightforward moral imperative. But it's got nothing to do with any of the other conspiracy theories that some of the opponents of the American administration imply.
You don't think there's any aspect to it where in the previous cases of Mozambique or Bin Mohammed, there was political embarrassment for the government over this, but you don't see that as a factor in this case?
Well, no, because as Hilary's already accepted, the problem lies with the Americans and not with the British. She may want the British to do more, and it may be that the British government should do more. Although I think we should acknowledge that Shaker Aamer is a Saudi Arabian citizen. He's no responsibility of our government except that his family live here and that he used to. But there's no more to it than that.
Hilary, do you think that's the case? That with I guess John's point is that you're kind of over-egging the case here.
Shaker is not a citizen. He is not a UK citizen, that is true. He is a permanent resident, though, and he lived here for many years. All of his children are citizens. His wife is a citizen. For many years, he lived here and contributed to the society. If you want to read the law strictly on the grounds that he is not a citizen, so the UK doesn't have responsibility for him, I think that that is overstating the case. I think if some of the other men had dual citizenship or had loyalties to other countries as well, allegedly, and they fought to get them out, and they were all released. So why isn't there a moral imperative to bring Shaker back, especially as he has been cleared for release? The government says he's not a danger. If he's not a danger, why don't we want him back here? Why don't we want him back with his family?
Is the fact, Suliman, is the fact that the British government has written on his behalf, do you think that's an acknowledgement that indeed they do have a responsibility here, despite, as John says, him not being technically a citizen?
Yes, I mean, even the MP Jane Ellison, and she's also written so many letters. So given that there are so many Save Shaker Aamer campaign British resident citizens who are campaigning for his release, so it's all about justice. How can somebody be sent to a country where his wife and children are living and they are born as citizens in this country, and it's only fair that he be returned to his family? And what is worrying and concerned, that what is the desire of Shaker Aamer himself? If he knows that he has left the country, Saudi Arabia, only when he was 17, at a very young age, it's like he has lost connection even with the country itself, and he has made himself a resident in the United Kingdom. And what guarantee do we have that there are so many others that have been released, and maybe in Saudi Arabia, that they will be, be allowed to taste that freedom, or would they be put also again there in prison? There is no guarantee even with that. So therefore, we say it is more better and safer for Shaker Aamer to be returned to his family where he rightfully belongs.
John, do you think more broadly now, perhaps, that there is now a kind of evident flaw in the whole rhetoric of the war on terror, and specifically in defining people as combatants when there is no conventional war to be had? Indeed, in some ways, treating them worse than if they've been captured soldiers in an actual war. Isn't this confusing the terminology and leading to the sort of American gulag of rendition and so forth that we've seen?
Well, it wouldn't. It'll surprise you, but I actually agree completely with you about the rhetoric of the war on terror. I wouldn't go as far as you on using terms like gulag, because I still think America is completely different from Soviet Russia. And to make analogies between a democracy and a non-democracy it's just, I mean, that's an equal and opposite rhetorical error. But certainly to describe them as combatants and to pursue something called the war on terror using these extra legal and extrajudicial means, of which Guantanamo is the sort of shining and most shocking example, I think was a huge political mistake, and it made sure that America's allies found America's conduct embarrassing and difficult to defend.
I mean, Hilary, Shaker, there's a statement indeed in John's sister paper in The Independent, where he makes actually precisely the same point. He says that actually this way of proceeding is building anti-Americanism, not detracting from it. Do you think that's the case? Do you think it's a significant political factor now? I
do think it's a significant political factor, and I think it very much is a recruiting tool for young men that perhaps don't feel like they have any outlets that are open to being radicalized in whatever countries they are. It's very easy for people with bad intentions to point to the United States now and say, well, look at this country. Even if you're caught, you won't get a trial anyway. You'll be stuck in a jail forever with nothing. So better to do your worst up front. I mean, if we can just prove that we're following the law, that it is the United States of America, the shining light on the hill, the shining city on the hill, we're supposed to have the best legal system and the most fair legal system in the world. But when the word like terrorism gets gets thrown in, it's very scary. This is happening right now in the case of the Boston bombings. They're saying that perhaps they won't read the suspect his Miranda rights, which is what everybody knows from watching television shows in America. You have the right to remain silent, you have the right to a lawyer. Certainly nobody in Guantanamo got those rights. But if we can't even extend that to somebody who was captured on American soil in a law enforcement operation, it bodes very poorly for the future of American criminal justice.
Suliman, were you surprised that the campaign got the 100,000 signatures? I mean, it's not easy to do, and do you feel that there's a kind of a breakthrough in at least on the fringes of sort of public consciousness about this case now?
Yes, I mean, this was really a very great, overwhelming, happiness and joy. Because it brought together people from different angles, where the political, cultural divides. Many of the people that have got together worked very hard. I think the people on the ground, they're campaigning and going from mosque to mosque and almost attending every event. It created a sense of unity amongst most of the people, especially amongst the youth, because it has created much awareness that there is great injustice happening to the people in Guantanamo, and it was forgotten. So many years have gone by, and it was a bit worrying, because when we seen the campaign, if you looked at in the month of October, in November it was sitting on 7,000-8,000 signatures, and I think once more celebrities got involved, many youngsters, especially with the social networking sites and those that are using the Facebook, that had a great impact. And the family also became more supporting, and they realized there is a great need for people, especially the family, to bring to light their plight and their conditions. And when people realize that this is a human being, and he has a mother, because recently on my trip to Saudi Arabia, I even met her mother, and she is in a hospital. And this is her cry and her plea, and she was in the hospital, in her bed, and she only wants to see her son. She's already very old. And I think when people realize that this is an ordinary human being that has put in a prison, he's caged away, that has given momentum. And I think more and more people, especially on the Fridays, where there is a large turnout amongst the Muslim community. And once the imams, they got on board, I think only very recently, in fact, in the last month, I think it had reached the target of over 100,000. And to date, I think it's over 117,000 that have signed the petition. I think this is it's very historic. It's really great, and it's happiness on one end, but there is still sadness, and deep inside I think people are worried and concerned, because over 90 days have passed by. Shaker Aamer is on hunger strike. His health is deteriorating. That is the concern. The more later, it's like saying justice, delayed is justice denied. We are worried that if there is more delay, nobody knows what is going to happen tomorrow. We don't want to receive the great sad news that Shaker Aamer has died in Guantanamo. That is the last that we want to hear. So we want, the campaign has brought this to brought a debate now. And if the debate is taking place in Westminster Hall, I think these are all good signs. And I hope people are optimistic, and they should not give up until he is released.
John, just let me ask you a couple of questions about what you think the sort of impact of the situation on the kind of sort of mainstream politics might be. I mean, firstly, we have this system now where the 100,000 signatures triggers a debate. Do you think that's something which has meant that petitioning has more impact on MPs? And I suppose at the other end of this, do you think that the hunger strike will have any effect on the way in which MPs look on this situation?
Well, I think the hunger strike must be directed much more at the American establishment, and I hope that will have some effect, because it's the only means left to the prisoners there. But I mean, I must just put in one word of caution, which obviously Guantanamo is a very bad thing, and Shaker Aamer should be released. But the one way to spoil the case for releasing him is to accuse the British government of some kind of conspiracy with the Americans, because I mean the British government position is absolutely clear that they're prepared to take him back, and to suggest that somehow the British government is colluding with the American administration to keep Shaker Aamer in Guantanamo because he knows some deathly secrets. I mean this is the kind of nonsense which might help to get signatures for a petition, but it's not good politics, and it's not the way to get him out of Guantanamo.
Hilary, do you think that with Benjamin Mohammed. I mean, there was an element to which he said things that the British government didn't want to come out. There was also an element that it cost them a lot of money, and that they've moved to change the law to make sure that doesn't happen again. Is there anything of that in this case?
Well, they have moved the law. They have changed the law. The new Justice and Security Bill passed. Reprieve was very much against that because we think having secret trials is in nobody's interest. But if you can hold closed material proceedings, then there really is no danger in bringing Shaker back, is there? Because you could just, if there was anything you thought he was going to say that would be embarrassing to the government, you could do it behind closed doors and no one would ever know about it, which is why I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, and I don't think there's an element of fantasy to say the British government is not doing all that it can. But with these new tools, it very well could push even harder to bring him back. And we do have evidence that the Brits were complicit in torture. There are unclassified documents that Shaker has filed. Shaker has testified. His phone calls, letters from Guantanamo, these already go through the censors. This means the U.S. government has already seen them, and they've stamped them unclassified. And they say that back in Bagram in 2002, when he was first taken up off the battlefield, he was terribly, terribly tortured, and he was questioned by British government agents who he didn't know who they were or what agency they were from, but people that were there, and they could see that each day he was hurt or battered or injured somehow. So there is evidence out there that something went on.
I mean, is that something, Suliman, that you feel will come out if he's returned?
Well, at the end of it, I think, you know, when somebody has been tested, especially if you, who has connection with the Creator, he knows that whatever has happened, it's like saying it is the verse of the Quran, and I'm sure if La yajrimannakum, I will just translate that if there is a hatred of a person, of a people against you, it does not mean that you yourself become unjust. You always have to establish justice. And I think with Shaker Aamer's case, he is known to champion the right of the other prisoners. He is very outspoken, very articulate. So will he bring to light the real condition and plight of the other detainees? And just like him, there are many other detainees who have been cleared for release. Now that I cannot give you the guarantee of what Shaker Aamer may do. Will he be silent? But we say that for him as a person, he knows. I don't think he'll have that grudge and hatred of any person, because naturally, as is in the teachings, that he has been tested, and he knows he has spent 11 years of his life in that condition, in that prison, and he knows for him it's going to be an elevating his status in the life of hereafter, because he is a man of faith and connection to a Creator. Okay,
just let me bring John in. We're coming to the end now, John, but I mean, isn't it the case that the Justice and Security Bill was brought in specifically because the government had in the past had problems with this kind of revelation?
Well, it depends. Well, you can call it a revelation if you like, John. The government has in the past had problems with the use of American intelligence in British court cases. Now, you know, if our intelligence partnership with America is going to be threatened by British court cases, then, you know, everybody accepts that, you know, there has to be special provision for this kind of case where the Americans don't want their intelligence, sensitive intelligence, used in public. The only argument about it is how best to ensure that, you know, things that have to be kept secret for reasons of national security can be kept secret, and you can argue about whether this bill is the best way of doing it. But to construct a whole conspiracy theory about British complicity in torture, I'm afraid, is not justified by...
Okay, John, I'm going to, without wishing to give you grounds for a conspiracy theory, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off there because we've run out of time. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you to my studio guests as well. Do join us for the second part of the Politics and Media programme.